Have you ever been so tired, so worn out, that it feels like you're literally falling apart, like your body is wearing out faster than it can possibly fix itself? Well, today we're diving into a really fascinating clinical profile from some old homeopathic texts. It's for a substance called Zincum Metallicum. And wow, does it paint a picture of exactly that, a state of just profound, bone-deep exhaustion.
So to really get our heads around this, let's start with a question that kind of frames this entire profile. What if that feeling, that total exhaustion, wasn't just a symptom of something else, but was actually the core problem? That's the big idea we're going to unpack here.
And this quote is really our starting point. Now, we've got to talk about this word. These historical texts use an old archaic term, fag, which, has a totally different and offensive meaning today. But back in this early 20th century context, it just meant a state of complete and utter depletion, where the body is literally wearing out faster than it can rebuild. So just for clarity, from here on out, we're going to call this profound exhaustion or depletion. All right, so our first section is all about the state of profound depletion. And believe me, we are not just talking about being tired or needing a good night's sleep. The texts are describing something much deeper, a fundamental constitutional lack of vital energy. Here's how the sources actually define it. They call it defective vitality. It's a condition where the body's life force is just too weak to do its most basic jobs. I mean, think about that for a second. The body is so wiped out, it can't even get a proper fever going or push out a skin rash. It's like the whole system's natural ability to react and heal has just failed. And you can see here just how much this hits the mind. The sources talk about this total mental exhaustion. Things like a super weak memory and just a deep, deep aversion to doing any kind of work or even just talking to people. One of the key signs they pointed to was this tendency to repeat questions over and over, almost like the brain is struggling to catch up and process anything. Okay, but here's where this whole thing gets really, really weird. It's a total paradox. Because even in the state of complete shutdown and exhaustion, one part of the body is described as being completely overactive and on edge: the nervous system.
So this is the crucial part. While the body's overall energy is in the basement, the nervous system is just buzzing. The texts even say the nervous symptoms are of most importance, and they show up as this constant involuntary twitching, trembling, and quivering all over.
In this quote right here, this is what the texts consider the #1 absolute defining feature of the entire profile. This fidgety feet symptom, they mention it again and again as the main thing to look for. It's the big one. And it's not just the feet. This nervous energy just takes over the whole body. The person is described as twitching and jerking, even crying out in their sleep. They're super sensitive to everything: noise, conversation, you name it. It's a complete picture of a system that just cannot find any rest. So you have to wonder, right? What did these old texts think caused a state like this? Well, that brings us to a really critical and very specific concept from that time: the idea of suppression. The whole idea here is that the body is always trying to push illness out to the surface. Think of things like skin rashes or even foot sweat. Well, according to these texts, if you use some kind of external cream or treatment to stop those things, you're not actually curing the illness. You're just forcing it back inside, deeper into more vital places like the brain and the nervous system. And you can see how they thought this process worked. It starts with something natural on the surface, like a skin rash. But then that gets stopped by some kind of external treatment. And because the body is already so weak, it doesn't have the energy to push it out again. So the problem gets driven inward, and it comes back as something way more serious, like these awful neurological symptoms. So to even begin to identify a profile this complex, the texts say you have to look for what they called keynotes. These are the symptoms that are strange, they're peculiar, and a lot of the time, they're totally contradictory. These were considered the most reliable clues. And this is where it just gets wild. Look at these strange paradoxes. Symptoms get worse after dinner, but are somehow better while eating. How does that even work? And check this one out. This is incredible. All of their complaints are worse leading up to a menstrual period. But then, the second the flow starts, they feel dramatically better. So strange, right? This quote just drives that point home. It suggests that the moment a natural discharge finally happens, the whole system just breathes a sigh of relief. It's like a pressure valve has been released, and all that suffering, the restlessness, the depression, the pain, it all suddenly gets better. And here are a few more of those really peculiar keynotes that they describe. I mean, these are the kinds of super specific, unusual symptoms that these practitioners were trained to look for to build the full clinical picture. from a crazy hunger at a very specific time of day to, very strange postures needed just to urinate.
Okay, so let's tie all of these different threads together now. What does the complete profile of this Zincum state really look like according to these historical sources? This table really sums it up perfectly. At the very core, you've got that profound exhaustion, that defective vitality. But paradoxically, it expresses itself through this totally overstimulated nervous system, with the classic fidgety feet. The cause they proposed was the suppression of natural discharges. And the key paradox is that everything gets better the second a discharge finally appears. You top all of that off with a depleted mental state, weak memory, slow thinking, and there you have it. That's the complete picture.
And finally, the way the person looks on the outside totally reflects what's going on inside. The texts describe a person who looks just as depleted as they feel, pale, anemic, with skin that looks kind of withered and almost prematurely aged. So as we wrap this up, it leaves us with a pretty thought-provoking question, doesn't it? If we just step back from the specific historical stuff for a moment, what can this incredibly detailed profile of exhaustion teach us today about that connection between our inner energy, our nervous system, and the ways our bodies try to show us, or suppress, when something is wrong? It's a pretty fascinating way to look at our own experiences with health and exhaustion. Thanks so much for joining me.